a rural library in Mid-Coast, Maine, and we serve officially 3 local towns, but really there are many other towns that come and utilize our services, and we're lucky in that it's our policy to give any child in the state of Maine a free library card. And you don't even need library cards to participate in most of our programming. So we try to, equity is really important for everybody. Let's see. Previously, I was an educator too, and so I was looking at a lot of the towns and cities you all are from. I taught in Springfield, Massachusetts, upstate New York, so it's fun to see some familiar places. Let's see. In terms of our library, we're also very fortunate in that the local middle school is right on the school bus line. So children who are in 7th and 8th grade can take the bus and get dropped off right out front of the library. And at that age, of course, they're welcome to be at the library without an adult. So that really helps them access a lot of the programs we have available. The high school, the local high school, is within walking distance. It's less than a mile away, and a lot of the kids who maybe aren't involved in sports and other after school activities, they walk here to the library after school. We do have a small teen room, but they tend to, spread out everywhere. So yeah, there are a lot of teens in the building every afternoon, which is, we're very fortunate, and we can switch to the next slide. So I imagine if you are here for this session, then you have either attempted book groups and haven't been super successful, or you're thinking of ways to kind of refresh and make things more interesting. So I think it's important first, if I talk about the problems that I faced when I started the job. Low participation. I think that's a problem for many of us at different times. So as I've mentioned before, the teens have been coming here to the library, but we were struggling to get them to engage. So that was a big issue. When I started working here at Skidompha, the teen services program had a very negative public perception. I think that there was perhaps, maybe not always a lot of oversight, and kids were, coming here and maybe not always behaving the best. And some parents wouldn't want their kids to come here and hang out with the kids who go to the library. So I was really facing, trying to shift public perception, which was a big hurdle in the beginning. I think that we all are very much aware of that need for post-COVID connection. So kids there's that strong desire for in-person connection, but also some hesitation. Even still, I'm seeing that. And in terms of academic demands, I mean, this is nothing new. Kids have tons of assignments at school, and so they're not interested in voluntarily coming to the library after school to face a traditional book club most of the time, because it seems like more schoolwork. My personal opinion is that kids are reading a lot in a great way. When I was a kid, I was very academically focused when I was a teen, but I can be honest, as much as I went to the library, I wasn't like going there for fun to join book groups. But kids, even though the ones that are like bogged down with assignments, they're reading for pleasure. They're coming here and they're looking for books. So it's a matter of finding a time that works for kids and finding something that's going to fill some kind of a need that's not already being filled and that they can't do independently on their own. And we can skip to the next one. So some of the solutions. So I started by taking our idea of what book clubs quote should be, what we as adults look for in book clubs, and just totally tossing that out the window. Just forget about it and ask yourself, what is it the teens want and need? And how can we deliver that in an appealing way? And so building relationships to me is the core of everything. And as library staff, library workers, you all know this and you're doing this every day. So it started for me as, like building connections with individual kids and also finding ways to give them a time to connect with one another, because that's, it's great to connect with your local librarian, but teens are really more focused on social connections with their peers. Keep it light, keep it fun. It doesn't need to be serious. Again, I might love to have a book club and discuss historical fiction with my friends, with adults, but that's not what kids are looking for. We don't want this to be another academic feeling thing to them, even a little bit. And one of the biggest changes I made is to think beyond the novel. Novels are what adults want to read in their book clubs. Kids are tired of that. And so we started shifting our focus more to short nonfiction and sometimes even graphic novels. And you might not think of nonfiction as something that kids would gravitate toward, but it's been very surprising how successful we've been with that. Okay, next one. So the basics. We've been doing this for about a year and a half, going on closer to 2 years now. We've been running these book groups, and we've branched out into other age groups now too, because they've been so successful. So we run the groups. They're 6-week groups every 2 months. This gives me a chance to kind of, clear my head, prepare, and have a little breather in between too. So it's, every 2 months, basically, we're running a group. And then after the 6 weeks, I take a 2-week break and then jump into the next one. The meeting structure is also very different. When the students gather, we meet in like a nice welcoming space. The first 10 minutes is really just checking in with the kids. I find that it's really helpful to just go around, and sometimes you can make it lighthearted and ridiculous, and sometimes you can just keep it very low key and quick. Like how was your day? Like, where are you at right now? And, sometimes the very first time you meet, sometimes it takes a couple meetings, but kids will be honest and they'll tell you where they're at. And if they're having a tough day, then it's important to pause and just address the rest of the group and say, like, let's just be mindful of this today and support this person, because, hopefully this can be a chance for them to have a little more lightness in their day and maybe make things a little bit better. It's a nice way to clear the air and make the kids feel heard and seen. After the 10-minute check-in, clarify the timeline. Okay, yeah, let me back up real quick. End of the day, I'm not always super clear. So the group will meet, my groups tend to meet on a Tuesday afternoon. So every Tuesday for 6 weeks. And then I take 2 weeks off before starting another group. And we do typically register. There is a registration because we give out free books, but we'll get more into that. Yeah, any questions you have, just put them in the chat and I'll definitely take some time at the end too to review those. Hopefully that makes more sense. So, and we tend to meet for about an hour at a time. Let's see. So after our 10-minute check-in, we have a 20-minute book chat. And oftentimes I'll give the kids like a little pad of sticky notes ahead of time. I give out a free copy of the book we're reading ahead of time. So once a child registers, I'll give them the book, sticky notes, a special bookmark, which I'll talk about later as well, and a basic general schedule. The bookmark kind of highlights what their reading expectations are for different dates. And so that day we'll talk about whatever the topic is. And I'll give more examples of this with specific book clubs a little bit later. So we chat about the book and any thoughts and ideas that we had while reading for about 20 minutes. And then the last 30 minutes is a fun activity that is related to what we read, but it's not a typical book chat. So that can make it a little bit more interesting. In terms of free books, I understand budgets are a tough problem for all of us. So in terms of how did I make this happen? In the beginning, I basically went to our director and I said, I have this idea. I want to give it a try. Can we is there any way we could put $100 into this and see how it goes? And then with our discount through where we order books, I just got 10 copies of a book for under $100. And and that's how it went from there. And it was successful. So the director was more willing to spend money on that in the future. Sometimes I've partnered with other organizations, like our local YMCA. We ran a book club together once, and also Healthy Lincoln County, which is a local health organization. And I believe both of those times, those organizations purchased the books in exchange for me doing most of the planning and organizing of the actual meeting. And then we kind of marketed the groups together. So that's a good option. Now, since it's been so successful, and that success has been seen by our board of directors, it's built into my budget. But I'm also going to start exploring grant options to expand this work, because once it's successful, of course, we want it to grow, and that's what's happening. Snacks. I mean, anytime you have kids, especially teens, they're always hungry, especially after school. So if you have snacks, they will come for the snacks. And one last thing I wanted to note before we go to the next slide is that the book is more of an anchor to explore concepts and ideas while we're making connections. So instead of thinking of the book as the focus, think of it as like the jumping off point. And then we can jump to the next slide. So this is where it all started, Chicken Book Club. I had run a couple of teen book clubs, and while we had participation, I could tell they weren't, kids weren't excited. They weren't returning, it wasn't like I was getting returning students for the most part. And it was just sort of like, I wasn't excited about it. I could tell they weren't excited about it. So that's when I started reconsidering the whole structure. I had a couple of teens at the time, every single time we met for book, all they wanted to do was so we developed a chicken book club. There is a local author in Maine who has written a number of books about chickens. And so that was the anchor text that we used for this particular book club. And we also decided in the beginning, while we were getting started, to sort of broaden the age group, since it's about chickens and knowing kids who, I know many of you are not in a rural area, but here in rural Maine, everybody has chickens. But knowing chicken kids, they wouldn't be as hung up on ages. So this particular age group was for ages 8 to 18. And we had a good number of kids across the board from all ages within that range. And so as you can see from this slide, we had 2 different books to address that gap. Chickenology, which is a fantastic book for the younger kids, and 101 Chicken Keeping Hacks for the older kids. So this was fully patron interest driven. They requested it, and we have to give the people what they want. And then I came up with some basic planning, and we'll look at a little bit more of what that looked like on the next slide, but keep it flexible. As with anything we do with kids and programming in general, things will shift, and we just have to expect that and go with the flow. For example, a big part of why we planned this particular group was that we were supposed to have the author visit us on the last meeting, and she totally bailed. And the kids were really disappointed. So we had to find a new way to make it fun, and we did. We started a tradition of having like a trivia game at the last meeting, and that has carried through to all of our other animal book clubs. So we can go to the next slide. And we made chicken tutus. That was one of the activities we did. It was so ridiculous and so much fun. And not every child in the group even had chickens, but they still had a blast making the tutus. And that was one of the activities from the older kids book. So sometimes the fun activities we're doing, I'm pulling them directly from the books. Sometimes they're inspired from the books. For example, the last photo is a chicken suet cake, and that is a child sprinkling mealworms on top. We did do that. Luckily, the weather was still nice. We were able to do it out in our courtyard. Just coconut oil and some different seeds and mealworms, which I stole from my own chicken stash at my house. Again, since a lot of the kids have chickens around here, I offered to let them do an egg swap, which you can see in one of the photos. So some of them brought in like a half a dozen eggs from their hens, and they really enjoyed sharing their own personal connection from home. And even the kids who didn't bring in eggs, like it was a big part of the conversation and talking about the different breeds of chickens and how they can lay different kinds of eggs. And we did have two birthdays that happened throughout the course of the book group meet, the 6 weeks. And so as you can see, we have adorable little chicken birthday hats. The bookmarks that I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show you, I printed out my current book club is Dog Book Club. So I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but this is my bookmark that I give out to the kids, and it has the dates on it and just general topic overview with just a little bit of graphic. I make these in Canva, but you could easily do it in Microsoft Word or, whatever docs, whatever you use. You just, a little bit of graphics and basic text. Sometimes I'll put page number ranges on there. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just a topic. It depends kind of like where the kids are at. And then I tuck that in the book when I give them the book at registration, so they have an idea of what to expect. Let's see, I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Oh, yes, scheduling reminder emails. This has been hugely helpful for everyone, especially in the beginning. Now the program is so popular here that the kids can't wait to come. But at the beginning, we used Google Suite, and so when registration was closed, but before the first meeting, I would schedule, email reminders to everybody. So if the book group is on Tuesday, I would schedule them to go out like Sunday night. And I just like to blind copy all of the participants' families so that I'm not sharing private information. In terms of the bookmarks, they are printed on cardstock. Doesn't have to be, that's just what I do. All right, and we can go to the next slide. This one was maybe one of my favorites, a Hygge book group. So this group was not this was not including younger children as well. This was just for teens. And so we read, sometimes you can even look at books that were intended for adults. So we read The Little Book of Hygge, which has been out for a number of years, but I love it. We're edging into like the colder season, and I thought, what can I do that's going to draw kids in and make them want to come to the library in the afternoons? And this was hugely successful. So I just listed some of the activities that we did here. So as I've mentioned, we meet for 6 weeks, once a week for 6 weeks. And these are the 6 different activities we did together. So toward the beginning of the book, it talked about light and how light in your home is a good way to find a sense of like calm and happy during, in your life. And so Catherine Home is a Scandinavian-based designer, an older designer. And so we use little X-Acto knives and cut out colorful cardstock in that design. And then we wrapped them around little glass tea lights with tracing paper behind it so that the light that shone through wasn't super strong. And I got everything on Amazon or already had it here at the library, and it was very inexpensive, but it was a big hit. Sharing sweets and tea. We have a lovely little cafe and bakery next door. So I just went and picked up some cookies, and the kids were so excited that some of them brought in some little candies. And we sat around and talked about the book while we made tea, and they loved it so much that we ended up making tea for every meeting after that because they didn't want to give that part up. Another activity we did in the book, one of the chapters had a little writing activity in it. And so I gave them a sweet little journal and a nice pen, and we did that writing activity. So again, finding like tiny little ways to work literacy in a non-threatening, not feeling like school kind of way. We had a really fun book swap board game day. So they brought in their old books that they weren't reading anymore and they were willing to part with. And I had a cart and I brought in some of my own too. And they just did a little book swap. And I brought some board games up from our teen room, and we just sat around and talked about our books and played board games. And it was a really great way to connect. We also made I'm sure you can imagine, the little white and red paper Danish hearts, the woven ones, which I hadn't done since I was a kid, and they're harder than I remembered, but it was still fun. And then the last day, I made soup in a crock pot and bought a loaf of bread, and we had soup and bread together. This particular group was so popular that adults kept trying to sign up for it, and I kept having to tell them, no, this is for teens. And so later in the winter, I ran it for adults, and we're actually repeating it again this year because it was such a big hit. We can go to the next slide. I have mentioned this already, but that talking about the book is just one part of the success of the book club. But I have tried to think, I mean, it seems very counterintuitive, but the book is less of the focus and more of how I tie everything together. And we've talked a bit about some of these other ways to bring literacy in, but in terms of collaborative creation, kind of on a whim, a colleague and I decided to have the kids make a fact poster. I think it was for cat book club. And so towards the end of the meetings, we had them write down facts, things that they had learned from the book about cats, stick it up on a poster. And the pride these kids took on creating this poster together was totally unexpected. But we hung up in the children's room for about a month, and it meant a lot to them. And it was a fun way to also engage the wider community, because people of all ages would stop and say, like, what is this weird poster here with all the sticky notes all over it? And we would get to talk about the programming, and they'd hear, what the kids were learning. And it also ended up drawing more kids and teens into the programming for the next session. This is a photo of our board game and book swap day. Even the teens wanted to play Candyland. We can go to the next slide. Okay, this is an interesting one. This one was a little bit different. The first time we put this out as an option, totally failed. I think maybe one or two kids signed up, and so we had to cancel it. We had to scrap it. This one was run by my colleague Molly, who is an adult services librarian. Another great thing about the library I work at is we are really big on collaboration. We do a lot of crossover, and we work together, and we find ways to lean on each other's skill sets in different ways. So Molly is also a graphic artist in her personal time. And so I wanted to do something with graphic novels, and I thought, this would be a perfect opportunity. Let's make a book club. And I also had art class funding. So we got a bunch of copies of the book Oxy, which is a graphic novel based on Finnish folktale by Mari, I'm going to butcher the last name, I apologize, but Ahakoivu. I can write that in the chat later if anyone's interested. And again, like I said, it didn't work out. I also think that we tried to schedule it for a tough time of day. And so we paused, we reflected, thought, what can we do differently? And so Molly decided, let's try it again. We offered it again in the summertime, we changed the time of day, and we also opened up the age gap a little. Before it was just for teens, and she bumped it down to 10 and up. And then it was hugely successful. We had a great group of both teens and preteens. And so then we also brought in a second book, because Oxy is really solidly a young adult book. There's a similar book called Foxfires, Volume 1 by Emilia Ojala, which is another Finnish folktale. And just the art in both books is absolutely gorgeous. And so Molly talked a lot about, people taking myths and turning them into comics. And so those two books were sort of used as really great samples and models for the kids. And then they spent time, and Molly kind of taught them about how to create telling a story through panels. And they ended up making an anthology of their own. And it was really a lot of fun and quirky and fascinating. And so we've got a great copy of that on the shelf. So even though it was a fail in the beginning, turned out to be a big success. So we can go to the next slide. This one was a total fail. I think it's important to share our failures too, because I'm going to share why I think some of the reasons that this one failed. I really wanted, when I started planning these groups, I wanted to appeal to the hobbies and interests of lots of different kinds of kids, so that it wasn't like just appealing to one group over and over. So I thought, oh, I'll just do a cooking book group. And I think there were 2 siblings that signed up. That's it. So we did not run this program. I was super stressed in the time leading up to it, trying to I didn't have money to buy the ingredients for food. I bought the cookbooks, and my plan had been to appeal to some local grocery stores to help, with food donations or things like that. And it just became overly complicated. This was not a group that I was excited for. I kind of thought it up thinking this is something the teens would want and I should do it, but my heart was totally not in it. And I think that's an important thing to consider. Don't run a program that you're not excited about. I'm learning that lesson over again right now as I'm doing a Minecraft club, and Minecraft is just not my thing, but we can find ways to, you should be able to run programs that you feel comfortable with and passionate about, because I think that trickles over to our patrons. So we can go on to the next slide. Next, we had Owl Book Club. And then just a few more ideas. I mentioned the trivia already. In terms of bringing in the arts, I think we all love art. Everybody loves arts of different types. It's just a different way to tap into your creativity, especially in the afternoon. It can be a lot of fun to think about the book you're reading, but also be creative about the way you express that. Anytime you can just put watercolors out. We've used watercolors to do things like draw a diagram, paint it with watercolor, and then talk about the anatomy of whatever animal you're studying. We've gotten little tiny clay pots. For the Owl Book Club, my colleague got little pots shaped like owls, and the kids painted them and put little succulents in them. And again, I hate to say we order so much from Amazon, but it was very inexpensive and easy to do. Another time when we had our cat book club, we just, again, got little tiny terracotta pots, painted them with paint markers that we already had in the basement here, and we planted catnip, and the seeds were so cheap, and we already had potting soil in the basement too. So we kind of, we look for what do we have already, what can we not spend a lot of money on and still make it fun and interesting. My most recent book club that I just finished was for kids, not teens, but it was about axolotls, which is, many of you may know, a huge obsession right now. And we brought dance into that particular one day. We were talking about the life cycle of axolotls, and I broke the kids up into groups, and each group was responsible for a different part of the life cycle, and they came up with a dance to represent it. And then we put them all together, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, I think just keep thinking of fun ways to bring in the arts. There have been times where I've showed short video clips too. Kids love that. I try not to weigh too heavily on, having the screen up during a book club, but once in a while it can give there's some great information out there. And programming, if you can tie in any other local relevant programming to the book club. For example, we have an organization locally called Shawanki, and it's like it's a camp, but they also have a nature traveling museum, and they run an owl program. And we often have them come in the summer for our summer reading program, but we had them come and do a special presentation just for Owl Book Club and their parents. So that was a lot of fun, and siblings were invited too. Go to the next slide. Just take a quick peek at time, see how I'm doing. Okay, I'll hurry up. And this one didn't follow the same structure that I had, that I've been talking about. This was a bit different. Reading with Pride. Of course, we do this in June, and I purchased multiple copies of recent Stonewall winter books. And then they only met once. So I would say like maybe a month and a half before the meeting, I had the books out behind my desk, and any teen who walked in the door could choose one, and there was a bookmark in it with all the information inside, the date we were going to meet. So the date of the meeting, it was in our big auditorium room, and I had tables set up, and we had some music going. I had ordered some cookies from the bakery next door, little hearts with, rainbow frosting on them. Got rocks, and again, those paint pens from the basement, and we painted rainbows on rocks. Our local Pride organization in Maine, Out Maine, came, and they had a table set up with freebies information. And then I also created some panels on large pieces of paper, like tabloid sized, about the history of Pride with little QR codes where kids could learn more if they were interested. And we can skip ahead to the next slide. Thanks. Beach Chair Book Group. Summer reading, to me, is a really hard time to get teens into the library. I just kind of expect my programming numbers to drop significantly, and that is okay. They're doing their own thing, spending time with friends, maybe working their first jobs. So they're not going to be spending a lot of time at the library, but it was still important to me to give opportunities to kids who wanted to connect and wanted to talk about books, because there are a lot of them out there. So it was just an hour a week, 1 hour a week, drop in. So there was no registration, just show up. There wasn't a specific book that we focused on. Every time I would have a cart, and on the cart, I would either put books that I had read recently and loved, or books that were thematically relevant to the summer reading program that maybe I had just purchased, or new books. Or I would go with a theme like all graphic novels, whatever I felt like. And I'd just set out lemonade and snacks, and it looked like this. And the kids would also come, and they would just sit around and talk about books that they were reading or recommend books to one another. And it really varied. Some weeks nobody would show up, and we would all drink a lot of lemonade at the staff desk. And then other weeks I would have, 6 to 8 kids. But it was, very low. Like, I didn't have to put a lot of effort into this, and it was still something that was there for the kids in the community if they needed it. And we can skip to the next one. So I would encourage you to think about what resources make your library and your community unique. We have an observational beehive, actually right outside the room I'm in. And so we also have done a bee book club. And ask the patrons what they want. Now that this program here is up and running at this library and it's really well established, our patrons are very eager to tell me, what they want next for book clubs. And sometimes, I try to take their advice as much as possible. And when I can find books for particular topics, some of them are pretty out there and I can't. But if, the more we connect with them and listen to what it is they want, you get a few kids and then they start bringing their friends. So we can go to the last slide. That is it for now. I will say that if anybody thinks of any questions, in the future, or you are curious about a specific book club I mentioned, I'm happy to share whatever graphics or plans, weekly plans, whatever I have. So feel free to email me anytime. And I'm just going to look in the chat and see if there are any questions I haven't answered. And if anybody
there are a couple in the Q&A.
Okay, peek in there. Are you still limiting the group to 10 participants? I have found in when it comes to teens, I think like 8 to 10 seems to be like the sweet spot, because if you go bigger than that, then it's harder for them to make the connections. I also don't tend to get a lot of teens more than that requesting the group. When it comes to kids, though, I'm capping it at 18. So I guess it depends on your community and your library. And try stuff out and see what works. You never know. And then Ivy is asked about dropping the age range and the fear that might scare away the teens. Yeah, so how does that work? It depends on the topic. So, as I mentioned, chicken kids are like their own special breed. And I kind of suspected that it would be okay, and it was. They were all just so excited to talk about chickens. The age was not even a thing to them. Um, so I will say I was hesitant and I was a little bit nervous going into it, how that would go, and it was fine. We tend to mix it up now. So sometimes we have groups that are just for teens, sometimes they're just for kids. And depending on the topic, if it seems like something where the participants would be fine with it, then we try a bigger age range. I will say that over summer reading, we did intergenerational book clubs, kids, young kids. I think we even had like 3-year-olds attending, a couple of them all the way through older folks, retired folks, and everybody in between. So it can be done. You just have to consider the content and who it would appeal to. And then somebody asked, do you do any extra promotion of the book groups to your communities? So we have a weekly newsletter, email newsletter. It's always in there. My other youth services colleague and we're very connected with the local schools. So we tend to, talk a lot with the local schools and teachers about them. Some of the kids are, like the local middle schoolers come here once a month for a field trip. And so when they're here, we do book talks with them part of the time. And one of the things we talk about are the book groups that we have coming up. I want to say I put the Reading with Pride one as a press release in the newspaper. I can't recall. So yeah, it depends. But I will say, like, if once it picks up steam, like, you barely need to. They're asking you, like, when can we sign up for the next one? They don't even care what it's about. So yes, a ton of promotion in the beginning. Social media, put it on your social media. That's really important too. Let's see. The entire 6-week book club all about chickens, owls, etc. Yes. Yep. So again, you get a book about a topic. I have found animals to be hugely successful and a great way to get kids reading more nonfiction than you would expect them to want to. But yes, so I think spreading a book group out over 6 weeks has another benefit in that it takes the pressure off of kids to read a whole book all at once. So I mean, sometimes when I'm doing my planning, I look at the chapters in the book, and that's how I build my topics for the week. I kind of divide it that way. And I also, excuse me, I think it is also really important to emphasize to kids, it is important to read, to keep up with the topics that we're discussing. If you're too busy or stressed, or you had something going on, just show up. Like, we want you here. You can read it another time. So that's a really important thing to me too. Did you have any community pushback on the Pride Club? No. But I was anticipating it. And also it wasn't very well attended this time around. I had another Pride Book Club a year ago that was better attended. So no, but I think that's a good thing to be mindful of. And it's something that I discussed with both my director and at our weekly staff meeting. So, it's just, I think it's really important to have the support of the staff that you work with, and if you have a board, so that if there is any pushback, then you're prepared. Do you suggest how many pages, et cetera, per week? Yeah, so that is typically it's typically in the bookmarks that I make. It isn't on this dog book club. I'm going to show this again for people who maybe came in a little later. This is the bookmark for the book group that I'm doing right now. But it's showing up backwards, isn't it? Anyway, you get the idea. In this particular book, there are chapters with those topics. So I didn't bother putting in pages. But yeah, I typically say, read this section, or, read about this topic. That way it's more about the information and not about, it doesn't feel as much like an assignment. Intergenerational book club. If anybody has ever read the Tea Dragon Society graphic novel trilogy, those were the books that we used. And so once in June, and we talked about the first book, we met a second time in July and a third time in August. Each meeting was independent of the others. You could attend all three or just one. And again, we took a similar structure. So we met, we checked in with one another, we talked about the book and did some activities about that. And then we did like a fun activity all together. For example, in I believe it's the second Tea Dragon book, there's some sign language. And so we invited a member of the deaf community who's also an ASL educator here in Maine. And he gave a lesson, and it was really fascinating and well attended. I think I got all the questions, but Cara, let me know if you think I missed anything.
There's one more. What age range does your library use to define teens?
That's a great question. Technically 13 to 18. But as I mentioned, which if you came in at a different, like a little bit later, you may have missed, we do a lot of collaboration at our library. For example, we have a theater program going right now, and it's for kids ages 10 to 15. So we're always thinking about like the development of the child or the human, depending on what the program is, and who is the best targeted age range for the particular program that we have running. So yeah, technically we think of teens as 13 to 18, but I know our current teen librarian, she pulls the 12-year-olds into the fold, or even a couple 11-year-olds every now and then if it seems appropriate. I think it's hard to keep everything black and white. I hope that was helpful. And again, if I share any information or plans, so just shoot me an email and I will always pass those things along.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristi, for sharing with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me today.